Good afternoon. I'm presenting my paper entitled Juxtaposing Devotion and Cinemas, the Devotion to the Black Nazarene and the Film Bona. In order to make my case, I will follow this outline for this afternoon. First, I look at the case of Bona. I provide an introduction. And then after an introduction, I will look at the case of Bona, the movie, Nora Honor's movie, 1980, Lino Brocka, and present her as a model or a stereotype of a devotee. There are plenty of devotees, and that Bona is just one of them. And then I try to look at the distinction, the play between the secular and the sacred, and then look at negotiated love. What do we mean by a love that's negotiated? And then end with a conclusion. Allow me to begin with an introduction. When you look at the devotion to the Black Nazarene, it's very easy to understand it as something that is watched, understood. No, Cardinal Chito himself said that only a devotee can understand a fellow devotee, because there are plenty of people who simply look at the devotion to the Black Nazarene as something to be watched. In the same way that movies are also something that is watched. But I think more than it being viewed or watched, what I wanted to propose is that effective watching of the movie based on the fact that it draws something similar or familiar deep inside you, and that the same is the case with the performance of religious performances. Religious performances actually tap on the familiar, but also at the same time draws you to something more. And that the religious performances as well as the cinemas are as well as the movies are actually filled with symbols that somehow speaks to the audience, relates to the audience. So when religious performances therefore is understood as performances, I'm not talking about something theatrical or but instead something that is done, performative in that case. And in the same way that cinemas, though, are also something that is done. Religious performances are cultural performances of the local, and therefore manifesting what is really local, endemic, unique to the people. In film studies also, the local is concerned not with fabricating spaces or creating spaces. No, cinemas, actually, the power of the cinemas is based on the fact that they're drawn from the lived environment of the people. And that's the reason why people watching these movies can resonate, can even understand what's going on. Shell in 2001 speaks of the cinema as a linguistic symbolic system that constitutes the spatial form of culture, visual form even, particularly it reflects urban spaces, lifestyles, and human conditions. When you look at, for example, indie films in the 20th century and 21st century, and when they speak of it as poverty porn, that's basically because there's no attempt to put an icing on the cake and to simply show the roughness of the scenario, of the situation, of the phenomena that is being portrayed. In this case, when we look at the Black Nazarene, no, we need to understand that understanding the devotion to the Black Nazarene to a certain extent requires us to put our attention on the persons that are involved, the bodies that are involved. More than concepts, more than ideas, we're more interested with the persons that are involved. And when we start looking at the body, the katawan, the real body, we come to a point wherein we recognize physical, psychological, even material dimensions of everyday life expressed in the body, no, manifested in the body, embodied even. Space, therefore, is always embodied, created by a moving and speaking body that is also, whether you like it or not spiritual as in a soul, but spatially oriented. By using Low's understanding, I am trying to understand the or break even the duality and the disparity between the objective and the subjective, the sacred and the secular, the physical and the representational, that somehow might have neglected the body as the location for speaking and acting on the world. In this case too, you'd see that there is an emphasis on the slum, no? But we need to take into consideration what we mean by the slum, no? The paper that I'm presenting right now is actually part of a twofold paper about movies and the Black Nazarene, no? One about Bona, the other about Tirador, no? Very extreme movies, but all of them focus on the slums, precisely because Bona lived in the slums, the Tiradors live in the slums. But we need to understand also that that context affects their everyday performances. In another paper, I argued that many of the informalities in the performance of the devotion to Quiapo is brought about by the fact that not only is Quiapo a hodgepodge of many people, the informality is presented by the fact that many of the devotees of Quiapo are actually drawn or coming from the urban poor. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's basically what I'm arguing here. They should not be understood simply as informal, no? But instead, we need to be able to go into their lives just so we can understand what's going on. The paper that I'm trying to present will try to articulate analogies, if you will. Analogies, similarities between religious and cinematic devotion, considering three aspects. First, the character of Bonna as a fan, but also, as I argue, as a devotee. The fan-devotee divide is very important for me because the devotion that Bonna manifests to the actor that he follows, gives her life to, also in one way or another constitutes the type of devotion that she is involved in. And that's the reason why when there's no longer any distinction between fandom and devotion, then I will start addressing the issue of the secular and the sacred, but also at the same time address the concept of negotiated love. Let's look at Bona, no? Who is Bona? And why is Bona or understanding Bona very important? First things first, Bona is a 1980 film, no? And it's a 1980 film by Lino Brocka, no? Of course, who would not know Lino Brocka, considering that he is one of the pillars of Philippine cinema, no? Nag-ayos na ako ng slide, sorry. So let's look at Bona, no? The film Bona is portrayed by Nora Honor, revolves around the character whose name the film is entitled, Bona, no? Or quite recently they refilmed this one and Eugene Domingo in a play, and it was Eugene Domingo who played it, no? The opening scene introduces her as a devotee to the Black Nazarene, and this is the first juxtaposition and where I actually drew all the reflections from. That it opens basically showing Bona as a devotee, no? As well as a movie fan, though. While little is said of the former, that she is a devotee, investigating her fandom, her devotion, she can shed light on the nature of her devotedness. There is a porousness that crosses over between fandom and devotion. Bona is a gendered and an age-based characterization of fanhood. Obviously, it is a stereotype articulation of a hysteric, well, that's how many people will call them, with an excess, of course, who is both immature and incontinent. In the movie, Bona offers herself to Gardo, played by Philip Salvador, a budding action star. She insists to live with him in the slums despite her father's disapproval. By offering herself, she is left uncompensated for cooking and keeping house, to trailing in the film set where she carries his bags, wipes his brow, and stands ever at the ready to light his cigarette. Gardo is the object of servitude and is overvalued. He is, in fact, devalued. The inappropriate importance given by Bona demonstrates practices that constitutes her engagement with Gardo. With her servitude, Bona demonstrates her resilience. Interestingly, she adjusts quickly to the life with Gardo in the slums. A scene even demonstrates her waiting in line with other residents at the communal tap and carries heavy containers back to Gardo's shop. Her daily ritual with water, from collecting to even heating water, in the film is pronounced by water shortage, manifests really a conspicuous act of fan sacrifice, as it is afforded Gardo the luxury of hot bath. Despite so, Gardo remains oblivious of Bona's feelings and unappreciated of her efforts. When you look at devotees to the Black Nazarene, there is also, in one way or another, a similarity, whether you like it or not. For one, there's an offering of oneself. No, a devotee offers herself, and does things for the poon, di ba? But not only that, many people uh, we wipe the poon, pinupunasan, hinahawakan. That's why even Bishop Claver will speak of the poon as of panyo, tuwalyat, spirituality, because we actually are spirituality of touching, of tactile manifestations. But we also carry the poon in the same way that Bona carries the bags of Gardo. We pull the poon. We work for the poon. In fact, the poon is the object of servitude. And many people, critics who do not understand it, would say it's an overvalued system. It's just a piece of wood, they'd say. It's devalued in the same way that Gardo is understood to be devalued. And this will also demonstrate Bona's resilience in the same way that participating in the devotion also demonstrates the resilience of the devotees. Interestingly, the adjustments are quick too on our behalf, no? And that's the reason why you'd see how people actually adjusts, even if people does not always seem to recognize what is going on. Both Bonna, going back to the movie Bonna, Bonna serves as Gardo's alalay, which is also understood as aid, helper, and assistant. This certainly goes beyond menial, servile, and even the feminine connotations evoked by the word. Bonna's portrayal as alalay inevitably, whether you like it or not, includes the untenable form of female exploitation and servitude in her reduction to an unpaid, emotionally abused, and sexually available female domestic servant. But we need to understand that that's very important to recognize Nora Honor. No? The affiliation of people to Nora Honor is that it's common. She's common tao. No, she's like an ordinary person who made it to the scene, and that's the reason why there are many Noranians even right now. The skin color resonates that. No, it's easy to synecdochize Bona's brown skin to the Black Nazarene and to the millions of its devotees. It's the color of the skin of the majority of fans as well as devotees, kasi babad sa araw. This is also true of the skin color of the cargador, porter, the utusan, housemaid, the manggagawa worker, the lavandera, washerwoman, or even the mamamasan or the devotee. With its emphasis on low-income informal work, this exemplifies the continuing prominence of the urban poor among the devotees, as I said. So there are more that I spoke about the relationship between Bona and Gardo in the movie as well as in the Tirador. But because I only have 20 minutes, I'll go now to the sacred and the secular. Many of us looks at the sacred and the secular as something that are separate from each other or even treat them separately. But it's very difficult to do that because we're not simply soul, we're not simply body, we're embodied spirits. Or we're not, what the body is entailed with in everyday lives is also what is carried forward in devotion. When you are able to recognize that your everyday affairs cannot be distinguished from your religiosity, that's the time that we see very clearly why there are instances of split-level Christianities, if I may use Jaime Bulatao's reference of it. But when we look at the play between the sacred and the secular, we actually come to a point wherein we recognize a very unique type of spirituality where there seems to be a working in, a weaving of the sacred and the secular. When you watch Tirador, for example, these are people who are devotees of the Black Nazarene, but also at the same time still part of activities that are perceived to be illegal. And yet also at the same time, they do not see any distinction. It's very important that to recognize that even in the field, they still can recognize the need for prayer. No, there's an interview that I watched last time about a devotee who said, "God is not yet done with us." And that we are still in the process of conversion. And I like that a lot. No, the recognition that there's a continuous attempt to integrate one's spirituality with one's life plays a very important role in trying to understand really how my everyday affairs of cooking, of dealing with others, or living in shacks does in fact manifest also the very devotion that I have, no, and that there are no distinctions between the two. The play is more clear in people who do not think about it, but in people who live it. And that's the reason why there is a sense of authenticity in the performance of the devotion to the Black Nazarene, an authenticity that is not always studied in theology. An authenticity where the poon remains to be the center of their lives, but also an authenticity that situates them in the very context limitations of their lives. Which leads me now to the third part of the paper, because I only have more or less 8 minutes left if this is going to be a 25-minute presentation. And that's when I start talking about negotiated love. No, Bona always manifests itself as servitude. In fact, in Bona, you see the extreme servitude, because when she was not able to receive any manifestation of a manifestation of love from Gardo, she will even push herself to the point of in fact harming Gardo. No, bubuhusan niya ng mainit na tubig. No, she will pour hot water on Gardo at the end of the movie. But those are excesses unto itself. So allow me to discuss these negotiated love in terms of three things. First, the excesses. Fandom and devotion are both excesses, whether you like it or not. There's no moderation in devotion or in fandom. When you notice people who have fans and things like that, or who are also devoted to something, this devotion and this fandom are always manifested in terms of excesses. The panata is excessive, whether you like it or not. And you can see that specifically in the offering of life, of effort, energy, and all of the mamamasan in the traslasyon. People give their all. And that's the very first thing that I want to show. It will look excessive because it is excessive. And excess here is a movement of fandom as it is a movement of devotion. Second, there is a desire to serve. Servitude, as you can see in Bonna serving her idol, is also something that is negotiated for what? Servitude as well. It's not simply an issue of unrequited love. No, this is not an issue of unrequited love. This is in fact an issue of trying to see further what the servitude is for. And in today's gospel, in fact, well, I'm recording this one Wednesday. In yesterday's gospel, if you're listening to it tomorrow, today, if you're listening it tomorrow, you'd realize that he came to be served, not to serve. No, to serve, not to be served. And I think that's also very important to recognize the mutuality, right? To a certain extent, the poon needs you, your hands, your feet, and yet also at the same time, you need the poon. You serve as the hands and the feet of the poon, no? But you also need the poon's hands and feet to serve you. There's a sense of exchange, if you will. But it is an exchange of servitude. It is an exchange of pagiging pagsisilbihan mo, kasi pinagsisilbihan ka rin. Ganong dinamiko yung umiikot dito. And it's a dynamics of love, I think. It's a dynamics of what I call or will call negotiated love. Yes, we negotiate our love in the same way that love negotiates with us. And it's very important to take into consideration the two. Not because there's a barter that's involved, because we recognize that we've always received more than we have more. And that's very important to consider. When we say we have always received more than we can give, then this is not really an exchange, as it is properly represented by utang na loob, di ba? Panata as fueled by utang na loob. But not only that, there's also a sense of tawad, no? Tawad, patawad, di ba? When you look at the exchange that is involved in market studies, tawad only exists between friends, people that you are familiar with. And when you say tawad only exists in that context, you have to recognize that you cannot tawad, negotiate with somebody there's no relationship with. The relationship of the relationship that allows you to spend less for something you get more happens only in the context of the relationship. That's the reason why devotees and fandom gets favors, for example, favors that are based on a relationship, that is somehow proven by consistency, a relationship that is proven by constancy. And that's the reason why I will go to the last part, that at the center of the devotion remains to be the poon, no? Our Lord. We become who we contemplate, di ba? Just as fans look at to their idols, even to the point of living their lives after them. We hope that devotion also takes that form, di ba? To look at Jesus, to stare at Jesus, to allow oneself to become obsessed with Jesus. There's a saying that says, and it's a Jesuit who said it, we become who we contemplate. And that's basically also very important, no? The more we contemplate the Lord, the more we contemplate our idols, the more we become like them. And it's very important that forgiveness, negotiations happens in that very context. So allow me to summarize the 3 points I've raised. First, Bona is a devotee, and when you look at Bona, you recognize the excesses of devotion, of fandom, but that these excesses of fandom also to a certain extent express or manifest the degree of devotion that we have. No, fandom and devotion follows a very similar movement, whether you like it or not. Second, in this play similarity between fandom and devotion, what we recognize is that there is no separation between the secular and the sacred. If anything, the sacred operates within the secular in the same way that the secular operates within the sacred. This is a very porous distinction, and if not, there is even a play that is involved in this movement of the secular and the sacred, and you can see that more clearly in Tirador, in the movie Tirador, but also you can intimate that or clarify that in Bona. And lastly, I've emphasized a very negotiated form of love, and this negotiated form of love is only made possible in the context of a relationship with your idol or in a relationship with your Lord. And negotiation in this sense should never be accepted as something negative, but always understood as a context of love, context of a type of love that is only made possible in the context of familiarity or in the context of constancy, devotion, or better yet, fandom. I'll close my paper here because I have already given my 25 minutes spiel, and I hope to clarify questions later on. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.